it has, I'll pause.
As a reminder, this will be recorded. We post it later on the Whitburn Center YouTube channel and on our website, so you can go back and watch them all over again if you'd like. We ask that you please keep your mics on mute, and we should have some time at the end for questions and answers. So Renee, take it away.
All right, awesome. Well, welcome everyone to our final Whitburn Wednesday of the semester. Thanks for being with us. My name is Renee Christensen. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a research assistant with the Whitburn Center for Governance and Policy Research, as well as a graduate student enrolled in the MPA program. I want to thank you for being here, and I'm excited to share with everybody the presentation that these two graduate students have prepared for us for their capstone today. So a little bit about the Whitburn Center before we start. The Whitburn Center was established last fall in 2021 through a generous donation from our founding benefactor, UW alumni, Jerry Whitburn. Our mission is to conduct nonpartisan, practical, applied research focused on evaluating and improving governance, professional management, and public policy in Wisconsin and beyond. Our vision is to build local government, nonprofit, and community capacity to promote the common good. To do this work, it requires we bring people together in spaces like this one today to share knowledge and equip public professionals with the tools and resources to better understand the dynamic topics surrounding Wisconsin's public sector. We're happy to have you all learn alongside of us. With that, on to our capstone presentation. Dr. Ford's going to give us a little rundown of what the capstone project is. So Dr. Ford, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Renee, and thank you everybody for coming here and for supporting the work of the Whitburn Center, and more importantly, supporting the work of our excellent MPA students, soon to be graduates if they do have a passing project. Maybe we can kind of crowdsource the grading after Monica and Alex go. No, I'm kidding. So a little bit about the capstone. So public administration, we are an applied field. So our faculty, our students, our alumni, we all believe in connecting our research to practice. I like to describe us as the embodiment of the Wisconsin idea, that the type of work we do does not just sit in an ivory tower. It actually has a positive impact on our communities. And the capstone really embodies that spirit. It's the last class in the MPA program. And I teach it, but I put that in scary air quotes because it really is a chance for students to show that they can design and execute an independent research project of their choosing. So our capstones really cover a lot of territory, and that's on purpose. We want you to produce, students to produce something that has value, something that has value to their workplace professionally, something that has value to the community at large, something that might just have value to them personally. But we want to make it as practical as possible because why? Well, we want our students to succeed in the real world, and we're very lucky in that we have about 600 alumni or so in the MPA program. Doing incredible things in Wisconsin and beyond. The main requirement for a passing project is that they do something that demonstrates they've met the 3 MPA program goals. The first one is that they can demonstrate knowledge of theory and research and practice in public administration. The second one is that they can demonstrate critical thinking skills, and more importantly, are able to apply those critical thinking skills to a pressing public policy or public admin problem. And then 3, communication skills. It doesn't matter if you have all the solutions to the most wicked problems in our society if you can't communicate that to residents to get buy-in, communicate that to decision makers, et cetera. So I guess that's a long way of saying that this is really supposed to be a victory lap. The capstone is my favorite course, second favorite course to teach because it's no budgeting, but that's not their fault. The capstone's a chance for students to celebrate and show all of the things they've learned in this program and really jumpstart their career or their career improvement, whatever comes next after this. So as you'll see today, we got a lot of talent in this program, and I'm just thrilled to hear from both Alex and Monica, 2 people that really encompass the spirit of the MPA program and the diverse impact we're making across the country. As Monica joins us from warm, sunny California, I presume. And Alex is here in gross Oshkosh today. All right, with that, I'll turn it over to the students.
All right, I guess that's my cue. So I will share my screen and we'll get this started. Thanks, everybody. My name is Alex Hummel. I'm the Chief of Staff here for the Chancellor at UW-Oshkosh, but also, of course, MPA candidate, hopefully graduating on Saturday. So thank you for this privilege and this opportunity. I'm really grateful. Thank you, Drs. Larson and Ford, for all the support and, of course, knowledge imbued. We really appreciate it. And let me get right to it. I've got some slides. I'm going to run through them very fast because we don't have a lot of time today. But really, again, thank you for the opportunity. My capstone is really focusing on a Wisconsin people problem and examining a UW system strategy while we also consider what I call a green rush to come. So what's the problem? Well, let's start there. Wisconsin is getting older. The percentage of Wisconsinites age 65 and up puts us at about 17th in the country in terms of of that population. And that's toward the top, I guess you could say. There's a lot of other states ahead of us, but still, it's not the greatest position. Meanwhile, we also have this problem of generating population. We are not having enough babies here in Wisconsin. We also are not attracting enough people to the state. So this poses a real existential threat to not only the population of Wisconsin, but also to its economy. The economy of the future is all about people. Do you have population to help you drive your growth and thrive? You can see here in this map, this is a courtesy of Pew Charitable Trusts, just kind of a snapshot of 2010 to 2020. Who were the gainers? Who were the losers in the nation regarding population? We fare not too bad, I guess, compared to our neighbors, but altogether, not so great. There's also been some studies that examine this issue, and particularly here in Wisconsin, there's been some think tanks that have really looked at it. The first for the Center for Research on the Wisconsin Economy. This is I believe, a 2021 study that just showed that the labor force is not looking strong. We've had domestic outflows of people and not enough inflow of people and talent to drive our economy going forward. Not a good thing. The Wisconsin Policy Forum has also looked at it, and they looked at it through the lens of student financial aid in 2022. This is more recent. Really pointing out the fact that birth rates are the problem, migration patterns aren't helpful, it means fewer students completing high school, it means you don't have that talent that's entering the workforce to help drive your economy, in addition to just generating leaders, which is something obviously that the Whitburn Center is innately concerned about. And then finally, this is the new kid on the block, Forward Analytics, which is really a think tank that was born out of, I believe, the Wisconsin Counties Association, probably most succinctly describes the thrust of this project and this thesis. We have a problem with people. We're going to see more people leaving the state as we get toward 2030, about 130,000 working age people, which is a little scary. And increased migration is the only way that this study suggests Wisconsin can make up the gains. Got to have young people, got to have people that are coming to the state to help provide population growth. So this was a very affirming study based on what we were looking at. And again, it's not only us. I mean, look at Iowa. This is a t-shirt courtesy of raygun.com and The Onion. But Iowa too, and really most of our Midwestern neighbors are concerned about this problem. Okay, so let's talk theory. You know, this is a way to look at policy analysis and problems that we learned in our policy analysis class. Thanks, Dr. Larson. And I appropriately snapshotted it when I was taking that class because I knew this was going to be helpful to me looking down the road. And this is Kingdon's multiple streams theory, where one must consider in the framework the problem, the politics, and the policy. And when those three streams intersect, there's a window of opportunity that opens up for you to examine an issue and maybe even find solutions. And I think that's a really excellent frame for us as we discuss today what I'm going to be presenting. What I'm ultimately arguing here, and what I kind of dug into, was looking at something that, to be quite frank, is often treated as a perennial political target, and treating it more like an arrow in Wisconsin's quiver. I'm a little bit of a homer here, but I'm looking directly at the UW system, and in particular, the comprehensive universities like the one that I serve at here at UW-Oshkosh. The UW system is a very, very powerful force for Wisconsin's economy. Obviously, it's generating graduates and talent, research. There's incredible faculty and staff knowledge leveraged throughout the state and sprinkled throughout the state. So that's why I'm looking at it. And I was thinking about this problem, and I literally wrote this on a tabletop that I was at a student event a few months ago. And I was thinking more about this thesis and this concept through three kind of lenses. One incentives, things like tuition and financial aid and scholarships that help students and propel them into college. I was thinking about it from a narrative marketing perspective. What do we tell? What do we communicate to students and their families to draw them into the UW system, which can be, again, a very powerful accelerator for not only their futures, but for the state. And then finally, this concept that I came up with, I guess you could say came up with, called outsincentives. What are we doing, if anything, to reward or entice students to successfmost get through their college experience, graduate, and most importantly, stay in Wisconsin, whether they're from here, and most particularly when they're not from here? This responds to that migration concern that Doss Boy pointed out with forward analytics. If we're going to bring people, if we're going to grow, we need people to come in. So I gave it a little bit more of a refined touch here in this slide, and that's just really kind of looking in through these lenses, and where, of course, they're going to intersect is probably the solution. So a little bit of that theory coming home to play. Again, we're talking about outsincentives like loan forgiveness, housing grants, tax breaks, and as I'll explain a little bit later, there are some states that are starting to experiment with these things. Not many, but a few, and perhaps Wisconsin might be wise to do the same. So again, back to the UW system, back to comprehensives. Why comprehensives? Why just the La Crosses and the Oshkoshes and the Eau Claires and the Green Bays of the world? Well, because they've proven to be really excellent, what I call portals of Wisconsinization. How's that for a $5 term? Portals of Wisconsinization. Portal has an entrance and an exit, and Wisconsinization referring to this process of acclimating somebody, assimilating somebody into the state's culture and economy. This is going to be critical for Wisconsin going forward. We need to be an importer of talent to make this work. And I think the UW system can be a very powerful one. So how do we know? Already, there are several institutions like UW Oshkosh, Platteville, Stout. You can see some of them listed here that are using a tool provided by the National Association of Colleges and Employers, NACE, called First Destinations. It's a survey instrument. And when students graduate, career centers, perhaps admissions areas, they send out this survey and they start asking and tracking where students are, what they're up to, how much they're earning, but particularly for our conversation here today, where are they? Are they staying? Are they returning to their native state? We will really want to know, where are they? Where are they becoming Wisconsinites? So this NACE First Destinations tool is something very powerful, and universities have used it in different ways. Here's UW Eau Claire's summary of it. This is kind of the way they present it. You can see some of the vital statistics here, particularly on outcomes. Here's UW Green Bay. They actually have a dashboard through the using Tableau software to kind of track some of these main metrics and tell their story. And then you've got UW Oshkosh. This is, again, my home institution, our home institution. And they are experts, I would argue, at not only using and leveraging the survey by NACE, but also doing some more intensive investigation. So when that survey result comes in, our career and professional development area reaches out and does more work. They're scouring social media accounts. They're reaching out to students to try and figure out where they are, who they're employed by, how much they're earning. And these are really vital statistics. And I think UW Oshkosh does a great job of really emphasizing a key point here for Wisconsin's future. How many native Wisconsinites are staying? How many non-residents are staying in Wisconsin after graduation? And as you can see in the bottom of this graphic, almost 30%, which is good, but there's certainly room to grow. And again, that's an area that perhaps the UW system, with some policy setting and some coalition building, can help grow for the benefit of Wisconsin, I will argue, and I'll get back to that in a little bit. Here's just a side-by-side look at it. Again, small snapshot here, UW Eau Claire, UW Stout, Oshkosh, even Marquette's in the NACE game. You can see their alumni retention numbers. Oshkosh, again, does a great job, and they draw attention to it. A lot of these other institutions are also, emphasizing using this as a tool to tell their stories, but some do it better than others. Some emphasize different things, and this will get back to one of my recommendations later in this presentation about what might help in terms of creating some uniformity in leveraging the survey. Let's talk about the students themselves. I grabbed some data from UW system, and I appreciate their support in helping respond to my request. Looking at a snapshot, actually 50 years of data, but we zoom in on 10 years right here, of in-state students versus non-Wisconsin students. So out-of-state students, non-residents. There's not a lot of conversation out there or a lot of analysis in my opinion, based on my review, of the non-students population. Now, certainly finance directors and admissions professionals are really keeping track of this, but I think from a sort of community, a colloquial standpoint, from a community standpoint, do we really understand how many non-residents are coming and taking advantage of ample opportunities to attend college in Wisconsin? You can see over time, the numbers here, I think it's about 12.8% decline in the numbers of Wisconsin students who are enrolling in UW system comprehensive institutions. That's a 12.8% decline over the last 10, 12 years. However, out-of-state students, non-residents, has increased 9.4%. That's pretty striking. Again, not as many of them, of course, but they're holding steady and have grown over the last decade. So that's an important metric, I think, going forward. I started singing to myself this new song called Non-Wisconsin, and I likely think you're all lucky I didn't write lyrics for it, but it's kind of it's an important refrain for our future. Here's just a quick snapshot of where these non-Wisconsin students are. You know, Eau Claire, Stout, River Falls, of course, their proximity to the Minnesota border is going to drive up their non-student resident enrollments. Oshkosh, you can see a little bit lower, but it's pretty sound. And we're talking a lot of people here. So there's opportunity here. This is the data, and I think one area of data that the UW system and policymakers can pay particular attention to going forward. It really does lend itself to a what if question, and that is, what if the UW system could set a goal for 40%, let's say 40% retention of all non-resident students throughout this comprehensive array, the comprehensive institutions in the constellation of the UW system. 40% is up there. Oshkosh has hit it. In fact, Oshkosh has been as high as 45% retention of non-residents in the last several years. It's peaked at about that level. What if? That's nearly 8,100 new Wisconsinites. That's the equivalent to the population of Sheboygan Falls, which, by the way, Sheboygan Falls, you've got to work on your logo. This is on your homepage. It was the utilities logo, which kind of surprised me. So, but we love you, Sheboygan folks. By the way, just in the last few days, the New York Times published a very helpful study that looked at low-cost, budget-friendly college towns. And I want to draw your attention to this. There are 4 in the top 25 of this study, 4 UW system institutions, including Oshkosh, Eau Claire, La Crosse, and the flagship in Madison on this one. But that's rather remarkable. So we stand out not only in a national affordability level, but I think even in the Midwest. And again, what they said, what the recommendation was, if you're from the Midwest, stay local. I would argue, heck, don't even stay local. If you're from the Midwest, go to Wisconsin, where there's more opportunity, there's more of these portals available to you. This is something I think the UW system can leverage going forward too. You might ask yourself, what about price? I mean, isn't that what's really going to motivate people to make a decision these days? And certainly, price is always a factor, but we must consider the power of tinkering with tuition, which can have drawbacks. We've been in a tuition freeze in Wisconsin, right? There's been a tuition freeze for a decade. It's now lifted, but it's still in place for at least into this next biennial year. During that time, what's, I guess, somewhat disappointing, one could argue, is there hasn't been really any visible tuition analysis. So that's more like a desert. There hasn't been a lot of, whether it's legislative analysis or UW system analysis on what happens if we start calibrating tuition, even though we can't do it under the freeze. What if we lowered it? I did. So I did a little bit of analysis on lowering tuition. And as you can see, based on what I did, I used 2022, 23 tuition rates throughout the UW system comprehensives. And I applied it to 2021 available headcounts for institutions. And I equalized tuition. So this is a little bit of a thought experiment. Some people may say, Alex, you're crazy. This is never going to happen. Probably not. But let's just take a look and see what happens when you start tinkering with tuition. And so I equalized the rate at state rate. So one tuition. This is a one tuition model for the state of Wisconsin, whether you're an in-state resident or whether you're coming from out of state. What happens when you go to one tuition? And you can see the revenue, the difference in revenue loss is not pretty. We're talking about a $107 million ding to tuition revenue in Wisconsin. So That's tough to swallow for a lot of institutions. You can see across the rows here what it means for individual institutions. Very rudimentary tinkering, right? Very rudimentary study. But this is the kind of thing I think that can help drive the public conversation. It also draws attention to the fact, of course, that the state is going to have to probably invest some general purpose tax revenue, straight taxpayer revenue, to help backfill this if ever the system was to do something dramatic like this. I also did a model for what I call a calibrated tuition rate. And here it's down by $90 million. So this was actually cutting in half the non-resident rate that the system charges and applying that across the board. Again, being sensitive to the fact that state taxpayers, they want to have some equilibrium with state taxpayers, so they're not losing in this, that they still have an advantage. And this resulted in about a $90 million ding to revenue. You can also see, and I should point this out, the headcount gap that would be necessary to backfill or to fill up all of that gap. We're talking about in the first model, 16,000 students, and here about 11,000 students. That's a lot. That's a lot of people. So clearly there would need to be some reinvestment of state taxpayer funds if we were ever going to start really tinkering with tuition in this regard. By the way, the prospects of that look pretty tough too. GPR allocations in the state of Wisconsin have decreased about 27% over the last 10 to 12 years. And that's according to the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association. So that trend too is a little bit challenging for us. There have been experiments, even though there's been this tuition freeze and there's not been a lot of analysis. Two state Republicans, Senator Dan Fine, who represents the 18th, and Senator Joan Ballweg, who represents the 14th district, actually proffered a bill. And the idea was to provide in-state tuition rates for the children of UW-Wisconsin system alumni. So here we start to see some creativity that actually is even bubbling up through proposed legislation. However, that too, when run through the Legislative Reference Bureau, pointed out a little bit of a problem. This results in a $50 million decrease. And again, this is best estimates based on some UW system analysis and feedback. So again, very difficult to tinker with tuition, especially if you want to start calibrating it perhaps down or provide incentives that can draw people here. So the UW System Board of Regents just last week actually did do some calibration. There's a Midwest state exchange program that has lasted for many, many years, and it helps provide tuition breaks to neighboring states up to 150% of in-state rates. Some states are starting to back out of that. So it's getting a little bit more competitive. And so the regents wanted to create a new program that somewhat mirrors that or somewhat provides some sort of incentivization for neighboring states to still send students to Wisconsin. So we're thinking along those lines. There's some new things starting to bubble up, but still there's been a lot done. What we really need, in my opinion, is we need an enterprising student to develop an app that operates like an audio board, where you've got all these knobs and levers, and we start to show to the public what happens if you attenuate these things, and if you like my radio days, if you use the old potentiometer on the soundboard, what's going to happen if you lower state revenue? What happens if you lower tuition? What's going to be required to make universities whole? Because obviously revenue is vital for them. So what about out-incentivization? Let's not talk about incentivization, tuition, financial aid. Let's talk about out-incentivization. And I'm flying by here, folks. Vermont does have a program. It's not necessarily higher ed focused, but it is talking about what they can do to draw workers to Vermont. Maine has Opportunity Maine under the Live, Work in Maine banner. Some of these marketing campaigns are very compelling, and it would be probably worth Wisconsin's time to take a look at them. But Maine actually did talk to graduates and provide an incentive and wondering, trying to retain that college talent in their state, because they too are starving for population. Minnesota doesn't necessarily have an incentive program, but what it does have are these regional coalitions that are trying to draw people to the state, particularly to rural areas. And this is something that I had a chance to talk to a very enlightening researcher about at the University of Minnesota Extension named Ben Winchester, who did a study that showed in the 2000s, and even before that in the 1990s, rural migration, what he called brain gain, is happening. People are choosing to go to rural parts of Minnesota for a few reasons, not job related. They're looking for simpler life, safety and security, affordable housing, outdoor recreation, and quality schools. And in particular, the demographic in the 30 to 49-year-old category are the ones making this move. So this begs the question, at least from my perspective, is there something going on here in Minnesota that maybe Wisconsin could also capitalize on? However, rather than develop just purely regional coalitions based on marquee businesses and economic development organizations, how about we center these and maybe even build some incentivization around our comprehensive schools and communities in the UW system? They could be perhaps like the beacon, the source to tie a lot of this incentivization around. Lastly, last part of my presentation is talking about what I call the green rush. This may sound a little disconnected to a lot of the previous conversation, but things are warming up. Yes, we all love these snowy vistas. Here's some beautiful shots from UW Oshkosh. Not everybody likes it though. And so what's going to happen in the years to come? People who previously maybe didn't think twice about coming to college in Oshkosh because they don't like winter might want to take another thought about that. And the UW system and its institutions might want to think about how to talk to those people who might give it a second look. Why? It's going to warm up. This is actually some research from the Center for Climatic Research at the Nelson Institute at UW-Madison, which shows that temperatures will be rising by 2060, maybe up to 7, 8, 10 degrees. This is pretty substantial. So will winter even exist anymore? Really a thread the needle conversation that needs to be had here about managing resources, but also thinking about what's going to happen ahead that might draw people here. Here's a quick look at some data that I gathered from the University of Maryland Center from for Environmental Science. And this is really a calculator, if you will, that you can use to input a city or a metropolitan area in the country and see what it looks like maybe by 2080. And here you can see some of the climate analogs for comprehensive institutions and their communities in Wisconsin. Things are going to be warming up, and it's going to look a lot different in the future. Again, for policy setters, this is important stuff to start thinking about. Things are changing dramatically, and we need to be ready to understand how that's going to affect, people's interest in attending college. I think it's something that maybe we could leverage. Just the other day, as I wrap up here, just the other day, column in the Wisconsin State Journal about this very thing. This is from Tom Still, who asks, what about climate refugees? Are they going to come to Wisconsin? And one of the most important takeaways right here, it's almost, if it was ripped from my thesis, I guess you could say, policymakers got to start thinking about this. What's climate change going to mean? How's it going to result? How's it going to motivate people? How's it going to push and pull people around the country? Is Wisconsin going to be a friendly target? I talked again to Ben Winchester about this. His argument is, it's hard to get people to move. However, it's undeniable that the climate change is going to create this migration around the country. There's a lot of other research I looked at regarding heat belts in the South, which are only going to intensify, more hotter days per year, driving people northwards. So it's something that probably needs to be factored as we look forward. Finally, conclusions and recommendations. I've already touched upon a lot of these in this flow of the conversation, but let me wrap it up. 1, better leverage those NACE surveys. The UW system could really universalize and standardize how they not only use surveys from NACE, but also tell the story of the results to better market their communities as these portals for Wisconsinization and draw people here. Number 2, look at tuition, not just through the frame of revenue, but look at it through price. This is always a challenge. We're thinking about revenue because this is vital to the existence of our universities, but also price is an important dimension to think about too. And what are we projecting to prospective students, particularly those from other states who might give us a second look as we progress into the future? This is important. Number 3, hey, look to Minnesota's rural placemaking initiative as maybe a template for something we could develop here in Wisconsin through coalitions, local chambers of commerce, local economic development organizations, tourism bureaus, but also on the state level, Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, housing. What can we do to maybe even build some of these incentives out there? And again, this is something that's hard to do. Last thought here, but as I wrap it up, how do we know what's worth doing? What's the cost? What's the value of a retained graduate? The composite undergraduate retention dividend, which I call a CURD. I had a little fun with that, but what is the quantitative and qualitative value of retaining a person? Need to know that number because it's important if we're going to apply tax breaks and other benefits, perks to get them to the finish line. I think the system could invest in a national marketing campaign. This is important. We need to start talking to a broader audience of people if we're going to import talent. We need to tell them about the potential here. and the opportunity. And 5, we need a study. We need some better thinking on this green wave to come. It's probably going to happen. And we need to understand what's the population influx going to be to Wisconsin. And for the UW systems perspective, what opportunities are there going to be to educate those newcomers and also their children? Because this is a generational change, and people are going to be coming looking for resources and looking for affordability. Last thought, this is some data I pulled for a HR course in the path of in my journey in the MPA. Diversity is going to be a wave washing over the country, as we know, as the demography of the country, the demographics of the country change. Here's just a snapshot of what's happening in our local region for the UW Oshkosh community. Already in the K-12 community, we're seeing incredible growth in the percentage of students of color. The communities are growing too, of course, but boy, those schools are really changing fast. And this is important for us to understand if we're going to make sure that we're appealing to young people to make sure that they've got an opportunity in college and in the workforce, that they feel welcome and that they feel at home and that they feel like this is a place where they can thrive. This is something that cannot be lost. It's a topic for a whole nother paper, I think, too. So that's it. Sorry, I took up a little more time than I wanted to. But if anybody has any questions, I would be glad to take them. And thank you again for the opportunity.
Great. We have some questions popping in. I'm gonna pause you, Alex, if that's okay, until the end, unless Dr. Larson, I see you popped your head in. If you want to go ahead with yours now, otherwise we'll take them after Monica's presentation.
I can hold on to it until after Monica's.
Okay, awesome. Well, with that, thank you, Alex. We're going to turn it over to Monica Jackson. Monica, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and floor's yours. Monica, you're on mute.
All right. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, great. Well, first of all, I want to say, Alex, that was great. That was really great. And I wrote all types of questions on a little Post-it note, so be prepared. So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to present today. I am not a natural born presenter like Alex, and I'm extremely nervous, but I'm also very excited. I want to say that being part of this MPA program has been a joy. I have met some talented people in a wide array of professions with the common goal of public service. And although it's been online, I know that many of my fellow students do live in Wisconsin, Alex, and that means that the citizen tree is in good hands. So even though I no longer live in Wisconsin, I think that the higher ed program is great, and all the students that have gone through the program, I think there's only good things for Wisconsin. So good on that. So why I wrote this paper? I wrote this paper for a couple of reasons. One, the beginning of my program, at the very beginning of the MPA program, I was fixated on what my capstone's going to be. What is it going to be? I had to be something that mattered to me, that was timely, that could hold my interest for an entire second year. And my younger son had gone to college, and it was time to vote. And he calls me and he says, "Mom, I'm voting. I'm registered. I'm getting ready to vote. What are we?" And I'm like, "I don't know what you are. Like, you need to know what your thoughts are and your opinions are and your views are." And I realized that we had spent a lot of time talking with our older son about things in the world, but that second kid, he kind of got lost in the shuffle, and he was looking for me to tell him what his political views were, what our political views were. And so we had a long conversation about that, and a long conversation about voting in general. So that's part of why I wrote this paper. So what I hope you walk away from this presentation feeling is informed. Like I said, I don't think that my son was feeling very informed, because without being informed, you are not truly engaged, and voting is a process that we all need to be more engaged in. You can disagree with me, but if you are informed, you have the facts to support your agreement or your argument. And if you agree with me, then you should never agree with me just because I said so, like my son. You know, you should always want to be informed and come back with something that challenges the process. Either way, I hope you feel compelled to become engaged and more interested in what is your constitutional right, which is the right to vote. So 4 years here, 1788, 1870, 1920, and 1965. Very random years, I think people would say, but in the course of the history of Voting Rights Act, they're very important years. 1788 was the year that the US Constitution was signed, and with that, white men who were 21 years of age and owned land were the only group allowed to vote. So even though the Constitution basically said all men could vote, it would be another 88 years until 1869 when the 15th Amendment was first signed and then passed in 1870 that finally ratified that Black men could vote. Because even though you said all men at that point only meant white men. So the 15th Amendment at that point stated that citizens, regardless of race, color, previous condition of servitude, were now granted the right to vote. But that also came with a lot of challenges, and that included the poll tax. They did everything but having you count how many jelly beans were in a jar, state enforced clauses, literacy tests, all of those things that were put in place to suppress the Black man from voting and keeping that right to vote only for white men over 21 who own land. So even if you didn't own land, even if you were poor and white and you were a male, you still could not vote. And that was not until, like I said, the 15th Amendment. But it wasn't until the 19th Amendment, which was in 1920, when women were granted the right to vote. So, and I want to say right now, when I say women, I just want to go back to 1788. This is white women. So at this point, we're looking at white men over 21, and at this point, all white men, and then some Black men who could pass some of the tests, especially in the southern states, and now women in 1920. It would take another 200 years and passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 before every citizen, and this encompasses all women of color, were granted the right to vote. Yet it would take only 1 year after that for the first challenge to the Voting Rights of 1965 to begin. So even though it took 200 years for it to come, it only took 1 year for the first challenge to come. And after 40 years, it was an all-out effort to completely repeal it. Why is voter suppression such a hot button issue? If this is truly a democracy, why are groups afraid to give others a voice in the process? For the same reason that only white males of a certain age and financial means were the only people deemed capable of making decisions for the country. Because those who claim, who control the vote, those are the people that control the direction of the country. So if you keep it in one set of hands, you can determine what direction the country is going to go in. And that is what everything's about. That's where all the power is. As this country continues to struggle and to become more comfortable in its own skin, embracing the gender, the racial, the ethnic, sexual, and political diversity that makes it worthy of all the hype that the United States is, it has to begin to accept and be willing to accept what that is and what change means and the responsibility that comes with it. So why is it difficult for those who already benefit more than others to understand when all people feel safe and things are equitable across the board, everybody wins? For example, in Mississippi, which also has the lowest education levels and it's the poorest state and has the largest population of Black people, it also has the stiffest voting laws in the country. It is difficult to say that there's only one issue behind voter suppression, but if you had to list the first issue, it would be race. Over the years, people have used many excuses as to why all of these issues are occurring in one state, especially a state like Mississippi, because why are people in the South more afraid than people in the North about giving up that right? When you look at the South, Mississippi has so many problems that if the voting barriers were removed, it would take multiple generations for Blacks to increase their education and financial positions. So to even challenge the power that non-whites have in Mississippi. So it's kind of frustrating and hard to understand why there is so much voter suppression in a state like Mississippi, when if you lift that voter suppression, it would still take multiple generations for Blacks to increase their power. So the question remains, what are, in a place like Mississippi, white people afraid of? At this point, I want to make it clear that I'm not trying to make this, I am not trying to make this a Black and white issue, but it has always been a Black and white issue. And so that's one of the questions that I mentioned earlier, is we cannot be a truly United States until we want to address those types of issues, that things are Black and white, things are rich and poor, things are haves and have-nots. So the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And this is where people get really confused. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 should not be confused with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. They are two totally different things. And the Voting Rights Act of 1965 came to be because we were hoping, well, Lyndon Baines Johnson was hoping that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 would cover the problems of voting, but it didn't. So the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was about prohibiting discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, national origin. But because of the economic disparity between people of color and whites, this requirement was seen as an attempt to suppress the Voting Rights Act for large groups of people. But everything came to a head on March 7th, 1965, when civil rights activists, both Black and white, were attacked by state troopers as they marched across the Emmett Pettus Bridge on their way to the Capitol in Alabama. This was the first time that that on national TV, people were able to see marchers who were unarmed, beaten with clubs and attacked by dogs and sprayed by water hoses by the police, just because they were asking for their constitutional right to vote. This violence, which was soon to become known as Bloody Sunday, horrified the nation, and that made Lyndon Baines Johnson want to extend the Civil Rights Act of 1964 into the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So on August 6, 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed. Right after that, more than 1 million people in the South registered to vote between 1965 and 1970. When the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed, it included two provisions known as Section 4 and Section 5. They were aimed primarily at Southern states and required them to receive federal approval prior to making any changes to the voting laws and policies. So that meant you couldn't go back to the poll tax and to the literacy test. For decades, the Voting Rights Act held firm until the election of Barack Obama in 2008. Within months of that election, multiple states began filing legislation that challenged the law and then, and when possible, encouraged voting registration restrictions. In 2013, Shelby County versus Holder went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court struck down portions of Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act, with Chief Justice Roberts stating that things had changed dramatically in the country, and specifically in the jurisdictions of the South, that we no longer needed that. We no longer needed that state protection to protect minorities in the South from the states. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in a dissenting argument, stated that the court's decision would mean a second generation of disenfranchisement. So going back, by taking out the Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act, she is stating, which turned out to be true after 2008, that voting suppression, voter suppression became easier for the southern states. And that is something that we're seeing now. Based on the racial makeup of registered voters, a person of color cannot become president in this country without the white vote. So you need the white vote to become president, but a white person can become president without the black vote. In some states, it all depends on where they're coming from. Like we saw this in 2020 with Joe Biden, who was behind in every single primary until he went to South Carolina and was able to secure a large percentage of the black vote, which eventually propelled him to the presidency. Which leads to the question, would efforts to roll back the Voting Rights Act be an issue if Barack Obama had lost to Hillary Clinton in 2008? So if that had happened, it takes me back to 1788, where women couldn't vote and men couldn't vote. At this point, and even today, the Equal Rights Amendment has never been passed in the United States. So you would have a president or a female president. This country has not been able to reconcile and come to a place where we're comfortable with the Voting Rights Act that was signed in 1965 being left alone and in fact being made more powerful. And it's just as we haven't come to reconciling getting 2/3 of our states to pass the Equal Rights Amendment. So I don't know if we're in 1788 or in 2022. So it doesn't know. I think it's still to be determined because neither one has been passed yet. The answer to the question about that is possibly, but probably not. The fact that women have such strong voting power, but that we can't get 2/3 of the vote and across the states to pass the ERA speaks volumes. Essentially, even white people, most of them who do not vote regularly, are more concerned about Black people expanding their power structure than they are about women gaining equal rights. And that is another discussion that I think that we all need to have. So, efforts of voter suppression. Voter suppression has been an issue since the beginning of organized voting in the United States. So whether you're in 1788, where men were saying it was too taxing a responsibility for women to think about voting, that was too much stress for their brains to comprehend, or whether it's, trying to have a literacy test or a poll tax to prevent men of color from voting, or whether it's a clear example of gerrymandering, which started in 1812 and was named after Governor Maryland, that came in to reshape districts to ensure that political parties, primarily his at that time, but later on to current date, that's done throughout the country, to make sure that your political party stays in power. Many states have soon followed this, and it is primarily in the South and the East, but it's in places as far west as Arizona and Nevada. The national coverage regarding voter suppression efforts has focused on Black people in the South, but the efforts to suppress voting rights extends to almost every racial and ethnic minority and impacts every gender and sexual minority. It is also well documented that efforts tend to be led by conservative groups. So I just want to be clear that, again, this is not a Black and white issue. It may have started as a Black and white issue because that's how we tend to look at things in the country, but make no mistake, this is a white versus non-white issue. In states that are with large Native American communities, the suppression method of choice is voter identification. So in a state like North Dakota, which has one of the strictest voter ID laws in the country until recently, your ID had to match your physical address. And that could be problematic because many people who live on a reservation, they don't have a physical address. The Postal Service knows that. The Postal Service is part of the federal government, and they make no accommodations for Native Americans or indigenous communities to vote. So that is another form of voter suppression. According to the British Center for Justice, voters of color consistently wait longer to vote on election day because they have further to go. They have to take a bus. They have to, a lot of them tend to have jobs that are hourly. And so if you take time off from your job, you're not getting paid. So do you not get paid, or do you vote? Again, another way to suppress the vote in certain areas across the country. Being raised in a small Southern community is just as difficult as being raised in a blighted urban city. So, but both communities have historically low voter turnout. It is, if somebody is, so if there are communities that even mandate that voters who need assistance to vote, or who have public transportation, but you use a wheelchair or you're blind, and you need additional support to get to the polling place, that in many states is voter suppression, but that in many states is being allowed as Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act was struck down in 2013. So those are different issues but if you're in a city like Milwaukee, Wisconsin, that has one of the strongest public transportation systems in the country, but you don't have a car, you might not be able to vote. And that was an issue, and that was a concern all the way up until August of 2022 this year, and a great concern for the midterms that people who did need assistance in voting were not going to be able to vote. Thankfully, the Wisconsin Supreme Court struck that down and made accommodations, and so that was not an issue during this midterm, but it very well could have been, and that is something that we're seeing throughout the country. Are voter suppression policies in place because the powers that be want to ensure that members in their community are represented? Are they in place to engage in voter suppression? It's easy to look at voter suppression as a Black and brown issue, but in many of these communities, there's also a large number of white people. The ugly truth about voter suppression is that it is about keeping anybody that's disenfranchised. It's not about, it's about keeping the status quo the status quo. It's not about empowering people to take advantage. And again, that goes back to what I said earlier about if we are going to be the United States and believe the hype that comes with that, we have to be willing to take on the responsibility of what that entails. And that entails ensuring that more people have access to something that was promised to them in the Constitution. The majority of people who are born into poverty without an education or considered marginalized for not being mainstream find it difficult to lift themselves out of this situation. And that's what voting allows you to do. When you can vote, you can help change your situation. But if you don't have access to voting, then nothing will change, and especially not for you. So since 2020, Georgia, Florida, Texas, and that's just a few of the states, all passed laws that were supposedly enacted to ensure that the voting process was protected. Instead, these laws, which all were passed very swiftly after through Republican legislators, only increased the number of barriers for poor and uneducated residents hoping to participate in the political process. So again, so these are poor people. These are people who don't have access to public transportation. These are people who are in substandard educational environments. Again, people who may need assistance at the polling places. And the thing is, again, we're in the United States. So illiteracy is a sign that our educational system has failed them. That is not something that somebody should be ashamed of. And it is definitely not something that somebody should use to take advantage and to increase voter suppression. If anything, we should be helping people understand what their rights are and helping people at the polling place and helping them to get there. So all of this, what is its impact on marginalized communities? Social media has brought voter suppression to the and the plight of marginalized communities to the mainstream, especially since I would say 2016. And again, if we learn nothing from the pandemic and from the situation, the murder of George Floyd, that social media is powerful. We look at other countries and we look at the social media and everything that we learn about the upheaval in those countries. Well, that's a two-way street. And it doesn't matter what your financial situation is, people are always looking to connect with those that they identify with. And the one vehicle that brings people together is a smartphone. So for even those who are not active on social media, they will use their smartphone to look up information. They will use it to read news, apps to connect with somebody via social app or whatever. But while social media has been an important resource for those, it helps to make people feel like they have a voice. But it can also be a dangerous tool for those who can use it to radicalize people who are looking for somebody to connect to and radicalize them against the voting process and radicalize them into thinking that possibly voting is a scam and voting doesn't matter, and that people are cheating and voting and things like that. And that all impacts, that's another form of voter suppression, and that all impacts who goes to the polls, who believes what happens after an election. So when voting rights are suppressed, so is the marginalized voice. But the voice of the suppressor is always heard, as will their votes be counted. So again, if you keep that person from voting, then your voice is the only one that's heard. And that is what, again, voting suppression is all about. And voting is the bedrock of this democracy. So without access to the process, entire communities will continue to remain invisible. When voting is only accessible to certain groups, legislators will represent those issues that got them elected and by the people who think just like them. There will be no diversity of thought. There will be no diversity and change. Communities will continue to stay segmented. People will not grow or move to other places. Jobs, people will stay in the same financial bracket, the same housing situation, and educational, and they will be stuck in it at plateau at an educational level. So, so while most landmark legislation originates at the state level, voter engagement is important at every level. When people argue that it's important to vote, you need to know that voting starts at the PTA level. I would encourage people to vote for your high school president. But voting starts definitely at who's going to be your mayor, who's going to be your city council person. And then, up to your county, all the way up to your state and up to the federal level, because most of the things that make it to the Supreme Court or that we end up voting for at a national election has started out at a city or county level. And it just went higher up the chain. So it is important to pay attention to who's on the PTA. It's important to pay attention to the mayor, even if that's a different political party. If you vote, then you can have your voice heard and maybe you can make some changes. But if you don't pay attention at the local level, then you are going to have to deal and settle with what happens at the national level. So during the 2016 election, people with an income of 75,000 or higher were 19.7% more likely to vote than someone who made $20,000 a year. There are many reasons for this disparity, but a collective feeling of disenfranchisement would probably be at the top of the list. The majority of people who fall under the increasingly large umbrella of marginalization face at least two barriers, with the first one being low income and the second one being insert any or all of the following: LGBTQI+, BIPOC, former prisoners, people under 25. There's a long list of low income and this. That really constitutes why many people don't vote, or many people feel like, what's the value of my vote? Nobody's going to listen to me, or feeling concerned or frightened or intimidated when they go to vote or go to register to vote. Many people in these communities have strong social structures, but weak connecting structures. So, and they also tend to have lower paying jobs, less education, opportunity, and again, rely on public transportation. So if it's not easy to get there, I don't want to take the time, I'm going to miss work. What's the point? I'm not going to vote. All of which make it more difficult for people to see change. And if you don't see it, then why bother to be that lone voice who's going to be out there trying to speak for the masses? So it's just like this very slippery slope on a very high hill. So just this. And so in states where abortion and transgender issues are on the ballot, members of communities who express solidarity with them often hold views that are contrary to the current elected officials and may be met with intimidation and not show up. Texas is a good example. People are leaving the state because they're being harassed when they go to register and to vote. Families that have transgender children are being split up. One member is has to stay in the state because that's where the income is, but then the other parent might leave with the children because their children are not safe. And that is because, one, they don't, they're afraid to go and vote. Two, the people who are in a position to vote think that one vote doesn't matter. And that's how things stay the same, and that's how things don't change, and that's how families split up. That's how families argue and can't have holidays together. That's how the status quo remains the status quo, and disenfranchisement remains the same. That is how this country is moving backwards. We're getting a lot closer to pre-1965, pre-Voting Rights Act than we are getting post. We should be a lot further along. But when you have states like a Texas or Mississippi or Alabama, states like that, then things are going, we're fighting against states that are a little more progressive, like a California or New York. And nobody says you have to be one or the other. You don't have to be Texas and you don't have to be New York, but you can be in the middle. You can be closer to Wisconsin. You can be closer to, let's see, an Oregon or something like that. But you don't have to be as extreme as one or the other. But it's important to understand that marginalized communities are not just comprised of the obvious groups that I've discussed. Marginalized means fringe, disenfranchised, people who have less. In these cases, marginalized means felons, like in Florida. Florida was one of only 4 states that had permanent felon disenfranchisement laws against convicted felons. So as recent as 2007, nonviolent felons had their voting rights fully restored upon release. So, but that took years and years. And so, you know, you have on one side, you have people saying, well, they've done their time and they should be able to re-enter society, give people a job, but you couldn't vote. And so you're a citizen, you're expected to pay taxes, you're expected to do this, you're expected to do that, but you can't vote. And it took two convicted felons who went to law school while in prison to go against the state of Florida to challenge that law. And so that now, as recent as 2018, former felons were now granted the right to vote unless it was a violent crime. But I will say that the majority of convicted felons in Florida are white males. And in addition, those who voted prior to going to prison tended to vote Republican. But you have somebody like Ron DeSantis who was voting against their right to vote. And if he had voted for them and given them their right to vote, they were voting for him. At least historically, that's what the numbers say, that they would have been voting for him. But it's like, you're just looking at the fact that I need to make sure that the voting pool is made up of people who I know what their vote is going to be. And that is not what voting is about. Voting is about giving everybody their voice. Everybody deserves their voice. It can be in confirming or dissenting, but you have to give everybody the right to vote.
Monica, since we're up against time, do you mind? I mean, I think that's a great way to end it on that.
Okay.
On that comment, if that's okay. I just want to make sure that if people want to hang around to answer questions. Does that work for you, Monica?
That's fine. I just wanted to say one thing.
Please.
That one thing is that there's me voting with my voting son. It's that, like I said, the Voting Rights Act was passed on August 6th in 1965. I was born on March 25th, 1965. So what that is saying, I am 57 years old. What I am saying is that the day that my mother gave birth to me, she was not legally allowed to vote in the United States. So that is why if you have the right to vote and the vote is given to you, and if you feel disenfranchised, you have to push for the right to vote. Everybody gets one vote. Everybody needs to vote responsibly. And everybody needs to talk about voting and about the issues that are there that make this the United States. That is it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica. Yeah, that was great. I know we're a little over time, but anybody that has any questions, we're going to open it up. I'll kind of review the chat, but go ahead and unmute yourself, raise your hand if you have something for either Alex or Monica. Really great presentations. Go ahead, Dr. Larson, just kick us off.
All right. First of all, yeah, Monica, I'm sorry you didn't have more time. I wanted to see all of your other slides, but that was just fantastic and just such a really powerful statement at the end too, as Alex said. And I want to, first of all, just congratulate both of you, one on getting to this point and getting over the hump of the capstone project. And thank you both for taking the time to do your presentations in this space today, because I know that's an add-on that we asked of you. But I think these two presentations were just, I mean, truly, truly, truly excellent. I'm like sitting here and giddy and kind of jumping up in my seat. I hope you both have time this weekend to celebrate what you've both accomplished. And of course, before that, I have one final tough question for both of you that I have to take the opportunity to ask. Your presentations, I'm thinking about this where they cross over, and I think they cross over in a really interesting space, which is the role of social policy in economic and community development. And I don't think I've ever shared this with either of you, but my master's thesis, my master's capstone was on outmigration in North Dakota back in 2011. And so when Alex started talking, I was getting all excited. And one of the main things that I found within that is that the reason I studied North Dakota, one, I'm from North Dakota, but two, North Dakota was the only state in the United States at that time that was not suffering from the recession of 2007, 2008. Since the Great Depression, North Dakota had been losing people until 2007 and 2008 because of the oil boom that happened in the Bakken. And so I wanted to know, through a gender perspective, what is this doing for women in the state? So to your point, Monica, about looking at how economic development helps people, but who is it helping? And what I found is that the status of women in the state was actually decreasing. Even though there was massive opportunity, their economic positions were getting worse. And I wanted to know why that was and how that was driving out migration and breaking that down by demographics, by gender and race and ethnicity and queer folks and all of that. Because it was really good for white cis men, but everyone else was suffering. And so I think the important thing, and I guess that's my question partially to you, Alex, but then to you, Monica, economic incentives are great and powerful, but how do we think about the role that social policies and social incentives play in kind of our states as laboratories of democracy? Because it might be a really great place to live economically, but if there are state level policies in terms of voter suppression or anti-woman legislation or anti-trans legislation, how does that factor in? And then my kind of second question to that is, are states the actual laboratories of democracy now? Or to your point, Monica, do we have to look lower, right? Are the laboratories of democracy actually now our cities and smaller communities? And is that a policy lever, Alex, like you were saying, that can be pushed? Because if we're competing, Wisconsin's competing with Minnesota for climate refugees, how do we pull people in beyond the economics? And then city to city, how do we pull people in beyond the economic incentives? So I'll end there. Thank you both. I could talk to both of you for hours about everything you just threw at us, and I just want to say thanks again. But any thoughts you have, I'd love to hear.
Alex, you start.
Well, I guess I would say, yes. I mean, the one thing that I've learned from you, amongst the many things I've learned from you, Dr. Larson, is I always ask myself now this question of, for whom? It's the most powerful question I think we can take away from this program, among the many, is yes, that may be the case, or this may be the trend, or this may be the benefit potentially, for whom? And it gets back to that, that fourth E, equity. And so I think along those dimensions more and more, specifically answering your question, let me drill down a little bit and maybe on this particular element, and then I'll turn it over to Monica. I agree. I think, the regional approach, if not the community approach, is kind of something that's rising. It's a rising thing. A state is very big. A state is very populous. A state's culture is not homogenous necessarily. So when you're looking at these regions, and I'm putting the pin in the map based on where these comprehensive campuses are, they're distinctive, and there's opportunities for them to look at incentivization on a regional level, and also make sure it's accountable. And that it is responding and it is inclusive when you're making offerings, and that people are actually thriving across the board. So that's probably not a really direct answer to your question, but we're onto something there, I think. And that commonality does suggest something that, maybe even the state level is a little bit too macro, that you need to really drill down on more of a regional level to see if it's equitable and if it's effective when you're going to incentivize anything.
So, I would say I know a little bit more about South Dakota than North Dakota in the sense that, but population plays a big thing. There are not a lot of people in either state. And so that's going to make a big difference. And then the people that are there, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Larson, that it seems to be generational. So you're going to get the same mindset anyway. And so that makes me think about Alex, like, so maybe some of the universities in South Dakota and North Dakota need to take that, your paper, and say, how do we get more people here? And how do we get a different viewpoint there? Because if you're having the same thing over and over, and if we look at, one of the slides I had was looking at voting from 2018 to midterms to this recent midterms, and voting in South Dakota for sure has gone down. And that is younger people. I mean, it has gone down tremendously. So those are the voices that you need to hear. But I would also say, like, why are they going down? Is it apathy? Is it, you know, that's the thing. I mean, we have this large young group of people. Why are they not voting? Is it going back to the generational thing? Is it not an import of new, different mindsets that challenge you and say, we don't always agree, but at least, like I said at the beginning, informed. Don't agree with me, vote however you want, but put some thought, like Alex said, put some thought into what you're going to do and to why, and not just because that, well, that's the way we've always done it. Or like my kid said, Mom, what are we? I don't know what you are. I know what I am. You got to figure that out.
Yeah, and I know that it's a big question for both of you. So, and you both, I mean, thank you for both of your answers too. And I certainly think, yeah, to combat the export of critical thinkers in a state, I think that's the big piece. And being able to invest in, you know, Monica, you brought it up too, and Alex, it relates to you, like investing in education in such a way that we're educating people to be citizens of a space, I think is important. But again, I'm sorry to take up the airtime here, but thank you both again. It's been great, and we're going to miss both of you in our program.
I might fail them just because of that, to be honest. I could use another year of Monica and Alex.
I want to say that this has just been the best experience. I mean, you know, coming in to this program and being in California, but being from Wisconsin, I could have gone to school in California, but it was really important for me to get that perspective, and all of my classes, at least one chapter would talk about how crazy California is when it comes. And in the discussion boards, we were talking about how crazy California is. So, I mean, just the fact that I learned a lot about my own state that I didn't know. And so as I don't know what I'm going to do in January. I don't know. So as Alex said, talking about what Wisconsin should be doing on the education side, come up with a couple certificates and I might just take them.
We may just do that, Monica. And, you know, now we have the Whitburn Center, so we're going to be reaching out to you all and keeping our claws in all of you.
Oh yeah, I would definitely take, and I have on my team, I have told somebody that this is a program that they should take. So yeah, so I will do my part where I can.
Awesome. Any more questions? I don't think I see anything in the chat. Anybody? Thanks all for sticking around. Super good conversation. Well, if there's nothing else, thank you so much, Monica, Alex, congratulations. Really, really amazing topics and presentations. Thanks everybody for sticking around a little longer. Enjoy your holiday break, and we'll be back for our next Whitburn Wednesday on it's the second Wednesday of February, so February 15th, and it's going to be the topic is mindful leadership with co-presenters Stacy Crowley and James Gallagher. So thanks everyone. Have a great Wednesday.
Bye. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Great
Thanks
job,
so
Monica
much.
and Alex.
Thanks.